We are looking for transformation. You're going to get rid of those coping mechanisms that you developed in childhood. It's going to be hard, it's going to be uncomfortable, but eventually you will find your true self. You don't need anything or anyone outside of you to change in order for you to be happy. All your happiness, everything you need is inside of you. If you feel stuck in your healing, you might be making one of these 3 mistakes. I'm talking today about some of the mistakes that daughters of narcissistic mothers make when they're trying to heal from this narcissistic abuse. And even the word mistakes can be a little bit triggering for daughters of narcissistic mothers because mistakes were fatal for us. We were taught that making mistakes was not allowed or making mistakes was unforgivable. But I want to assure you that with this talk, these mistakes are normal, they're common. Everybody makes them, including myself. And that is actually why I wanted to address them, because they are so universal, these mistakes that we make when we try to heal and that actually prevent us from healing. I just wanted to give you this information so that if you have been making these mistakes, you can course correct or at least get a little bit of understanding about why this might not be working for you. So the first mistake that people make is relying on mainstream self-help and therapy. And this is one that kept me back from my healing for 20 years. I spent 20 years in therapy and dabbling in self-help as well, but mainly in mainstream therapy. This is going back to the 90s, so they barely even had the ACEs study, which was the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that was done in 1995. And this was the huge study that made the link between childhood trauma and adult negative outcomes. Now, at the time I started therapy, I went to try and figure out why, as a young adult, I couldn't really get my life together. Like why I seemed to be self-sabotaging at every turn, why I was thinking so negatively, and then also to understand why my relationship with my mother wasn't working. But it was mainly about the self-sabotage, I would say. And I go to this therapist and I do a whole intake. And so she can see how totally messed up my family is. And she acknowledges that. But there's no connection made between this dismal upbringing and the self-sabotage that I was subject to as an adult. Whereas the ACEs study, if she had known about it, shows us that our adult outcomes are directly related to what happened to us in the childhood home. And that if we don't heal that trauma, because it is trauma, I didn't know at the time I had been through trauma, but I definitely had some of the worst kind of trauma that you can find in a home, although that's all relative. You know, everybody's trauma is valid, and I'm not here to minimize or maximize anybody's pain. But yeah, I had been through a lot in my home that prevented me from being able to make my way through life in an effective or empowered manner at all. And in fact, what this therapist also didn't know is that the self-sabotage is a symptom of this childhood trauma. And what it is the child inside you trying to keep you safe, trying to protect you from harm. So this is the deep irony and the very sad fact of self-sabotage, that it is there to protect you. And there is a child inside you who fiercely believes that this self-sabotage is keeping you alive. And that is why it's so hard to stop. That is why if you don't know why you're doing what you do, you can't stop. It's like one of my sabotages was an addiction to alcohol in the past. I haven't drank since 2010, but in the past, that was my drug of choice. And you couldn't tell me to stop, to say stop drinking. Well, yeah, I know I'm supposed to stop drinking, but I can't. And the reason why was because that part of me inside believed that alcohol was necessary to keep me alive, because the pain I endured when I didn't drink would have been too great for me to handle. And that is actually a fact. So we see how these coping mechanisms that we develop in childhood to really deal with the pain of the trauma being inflicted on us, it's quite intelligent in a way. It does prevent you from experiencing all that pain. But of course, you can see at the same time how it really holds you back from all the wonderful things life has for you. Of course, that's why we have to deal with it. So, this type of therapy, I was told it's basically positive psychology. And I was given a positive psychology book. It was called Learned Optimism. I know it's hard to believe, but it really wasn't any more complicated than you just need to think more positively. Like, if you always expect the worst, which was one of my complaints, I didn't understand why I would expect the worst instead of being hopeful or expecting the best. Now I know that that was a coping mechanism because if I expected the best, my mother would pull the rug out from under me and I would be devastated. So to protect myself from that deep disappointment, I would expect the worst because I could plan for that. I could be prepared for that when the worst came, which it often did with my mother, right? So that's the explanation why I did it. Of course, that's subconscious, or it's a part of me I wasn't in touch with. So I didn't know that. And so I'm reading this book, Learned Optimism, and I'm just feeling worse and worse about myself. And this is not a dig on that book or positive psychology. That modality has helped a lot of people. It's great for the right people, but it is not what someone who is beginning to heal from trauma needs. It's not the right modality, in my opinion. So I was feeling worse and worse reading this book, not resonating with it at all, not understanding why I can't get this. Why can't I just think more positively? Because it was all on the logical level, CBT as well, NLP as well. It's all about changing your thoughts, saying the right thing, telling yourself this Pollyanna version of reality. And what this therapy didn't realize, or what these modalities don't take into account, is that what we are dealing with as trauma survivors is not neck up, it is neck down. So knowing something logically, like I am not in danger when I am giving a presentation to my peers, that logical thought does not filter down to the level of the body. The body will continue to be in a state of fight or flight or a state of survival, regardless of how many pep talks you give it. It doesn't matter what the truth is, which is that you're among your peers, you have nothing to be afraid of. Your body is experiencing that fear of rejection that it did when you were back in the home, that vulnerability that felt so unsafe. That is all in your nervous system. That's inner child stuff that's down at the level of the body. So to try to combat what is a survival mechanism trying to keep you alive with happy thoughts, you can see why it's not going to work. It's like you can feel good and you can be happy, or you can stay alive. Which one do you think is going to want to win? Like if you're out, I have the image of like being out in a riptide, like out on the ocean and trying to battle your way back to shore. Are you going to be more concerned with feeling good, or are you going to be concerned with just getting the hell to shore however you can? That's how you feel when you're in that state. So to go to therapy that gives you neck up strategies that deal with changing your thoughts, thinking positively, anything along those lines, and behavior modification, like have better habits, all these things make you police yourself more. So they make you feel kind of bad about yourself because it's working for other people. It's not working for you. You already are hypervigilant. It's just kind of increasing that because you're policing yourself. You're policing your thoughts. You're watching what you say. You're not being authentic. And you are changing behaviors without understanding why you do the behavior in the first place. You're changing thoughts without getting curious about why you think that way. This very surface level stuff, and it's not going to create any true transformation in your life, because that is what we're looking for. We are looking for transformation. That means when you do this work, you should be a different person at the end of it than you were when you started, or a different version of yourself. And what's going to happen is that You are going to slough off like a snake shedding its skin. You're going to get rid of those coping mechanisms that you developed in childhood. And this is going to be a process. It's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to take practice. It's going to take time. But eventually, one by one, you will start to get rid of those coping mechanisms and you will find your true self that is very deeply buried underneath all those things you had to do to survive. So if instead of going through that process of digging deep into yourself and understanding why you do things, getting curious about your thoughts, how are they protecting me? Understand that every part of you is on your own side, unlike the therapy I got that just told me that I was my worst enemy and I need to stop thinking so negatively. Just stop. Like, how is that therapy? But that is really what I got. And all these modalities and all this time and all this money spent on things that never really made a difference. All they did was have me be super self-aware to the point where I was watching every word, watching every move, checking myself all the time. And as long as I could behave perfectly, I was okay. But as soon as I relaxed and allowed myself to kind of go back to my old ways, like just stop trying so hard, I would just go right back to my old self-sabotage. So what the work that I recommend, the work that I help people with, what it does is to the point where you don't have to try because you are becoming this new version of yourself. It's not about trying. You don't even have to try to set boundaries anymore. The boundaries come naturally because you have become this new woman. I had a client who didn't even realize she had set a boundary. She came to the session and she described to me what happened. And I said, wow, good for you. You set a boundary. And she started to cry because she didn't realize that's what she had done. It was just the new version of herself expressing itself in the way that felt natural. And you'll just realize I can no longer put up with this. Even things like going no contact that seems so confusing and so you don't know what to do. You don't know whether to go no contact. You don't know if it's the right decision. You're all fraught. When you do this healing, those kind of answers will come to you, either from your higher self or just out of the fact that you can't take this treatment anymore. You just become the person who's like, I can't believe I ever put up with that. You just are naturally defending yourself just as a parent would defend a child, because now you have become your own parent. And then the self-help is very much the same thing. Self-help does a lot of things like telling us to leap and the net will appear. That was actually the name of a book I read that didn't help me either. Leap and the net will appear. And totally ignoring the nervous system once again. Tony Robbins says, burn the boats, And again, these people are great. Tony Robbins is great. Nothing against them. But it's not for someone who's doing the beginning stages of a healing journey, because burning it all down and having no plan B and quitting your job and starting a business when you are in this nervous system state, it's not going to be successful. You've got to do this work before you can just do it, as they say. The just do it mentality is not what you want when you're doing this work. You got to deal with yourself at the level of the nervous system. You have to be willing to get outside of your comfort zone, yes. But if you're in this state and you leap, chances are the net will not appear and you'll fall on your face and you will be re-traumatized. And I don't say that to discourage you at all. All I'm saying is that I believe the inner work needs to be done before the outer actions are going to have the effect that they should. So changing behaviors, taking massive action, doing all these kind of things. We need to learn to regulate our nervous system first so that you can expand your comfort zone, so that you can stretch and do things that expand you, but with a sense of safety. So learn to soothe yourself when you feel those nervous system responses. Instead of detaching from yourself and just do it, like the slogan says, a lot of that just do it mentality is abandoning yourself. It is pushing through. And sometimes you do want to push through a certain amount of pain. You do want to get outside your comfort zone. But when you are healing from this stuff, you've got to make yourself feel that sense of safety. Otherwise, it's going to be too much too soon. It's going to backfire and it's just going to make you feel worse. You're going to feel like one step forward, two steps back. Those are the things about self-help and therapy that really make it a bad fit for trauma survivors. So it's the neck up strategies that ignore the survival mechanisms going on below. I want to say too that this is not to demonize therapy. There is good therapy out there. There is therapy by people who have been through this stuff as well. And that was one of the things that was not working for me with the therapy as well, is that the therapist hadn't been through it. They didn't understand narcissistic abuse. They'd never had a mother like this. They couldn't imagine that a family member would treat you this way. So what they kept doing was giving me strategy after strategy on how to try and have a relationship with my mother, not realizing that all this was doing was causing me more pain. It was really demeaning me because it was putting all the onus on me to try and make something work that was never going to work. It was taking all my energy and my money, by the way, because of the therapy I was in for years and years and years. It's like sending me back out into the battlefield with another strategy every week. That didn't work, try this. That didn't work, try this. And what they believed is that I was trying to connect with a normal person, when in fact, this was a person with a personality disorder who was not interested in connecting with me, and it was never going to have the impacts that they were hoping. And the number 2 mistake that daughters of narcissistic mothers make is focusing too much on forgiveness. So I hear a lot of people saying they really need to forgive. They believe the societal lie. I would say that forgiveness is necessary in order to heal. They say you're only hurting yourself if you don't forgive. They say not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I would disagree with that. I would say that is a description of resentment, and resentment and a lack of forgiveness are not the same thing. You do not have to forgive your mother. You certainly don't want to force yourself to forgive someone before you're ready. That just feeds into the old inauthenticity, the self-abandonment, and the refusal to process authentic emotions. So it's just more of the same pattern if you force yourself to forgive someone just because the world tells you to, or you believe that it's necessary in order to heal. It is not necessary. And in addition, not only is it not necessary, it can hold you back. Forgiveness may not only be unnecessary, it might be a bad idea, at least at the time. Forgiveness is one of those things that will come when the time is right. It's kind of like that woman I described who set boundaries without even trying. Forgiveness will come to you when you least expect it. At least that's been my experience. What you want to focus on really, and I want to add, you don't want to depend on the opinions of people outside of you or so-called experts who will say things like, all our parents did the best they could. How do you know that? This always comes from people who came from pretty good families, and they can imagine, again, just like my therapist, that anybody would treat their children maliciously or intentionally harm them, which is what narcissistic mothers do. When I hear someone say, our parents all did the best they could, I feel a flash of anger on behalf of my clients and my old self, because you have no right to say that. I've worked with clients who have had abominable things done to them, both physically, emotionally, sexually, that telling them that parents like that did the best they could, I actually find that offensive. And so if you have had a parent who has been malicious, who has harmed you intentionally, manipulated you in the worst ways, crushed your self-esteem on purpose, by the way, you do not have to believe that they did the best they could. They didn't. They didn't even try a lot of the time. So I want you to accept the truth of what happened to you and not listen to these so-called experts who say they did the best they could when they didn't. You want a cohesive narrative of what happened to you. You do not want to minimize your experience. You want to tell the truth about what your parents did and how it made you feel and the impact that it had on you. And this is not to blame anyone, which is something else that the world loves to scold us for. You shouldn't be blaming your parents. Is not blaming your parents to tell the truth. It is giving them accountability. And it doesn't need to be done out loud. You don't actually want to try to get accountability from your mother. You've tried that. It doesn't work. She's not going to take it. But for yourself, you want to put that accountability on her because you've been carrying all these things that were not yours to carry. You've been carrying the shame. You've been carrying the guilt. You've been carrying the burden of trying to make the relationship work when it never would. Put that back on her, not with contact, not by telling her, but just in your own heart and mind. Know that this is no longer yours to carry. So I want you to focus instead on forgiving yourself. Because this is something a lot of daughters struggle with, is the feeling that, oh, why did this take me so long? The feeling that I'm in my 50s, I'm in my 60s, or maybe 40s or 30s, and I should have known better. But you want to ask yourself, how could you have known any different? As I've said in other talks here, you've been immersed in this your whole life. You've been conditioned and brainwashed your whole life in the cult of the narcissistic family to be under her control. She wanted it that way. And these mechanisms that make you self-sabotage, this biological imperative to connect with your mother, regardless of how badly she's treating you, these are all very powerful forces, and they are in you at the level of survival. So something in you believes that you need this stuff to stay alive, and you didn't know. It's very tricky. How could you know this stuff if you weren't educated? I mean, I had to do university level work to understand this stuff and bring it to you. So how can you expect not only being conditioned, not only having the world saying stupid things like all parents did the best they could, and you should forgive everybody or else you're not going to heal, lies? How can you expect to just magically know what's going on with your mother? It takes a lot of education. It takes a lot of self-acceptance. It takes reprogramming your subconscious from the cult-like conditioning of the narcissistic family. It takes a lot to overcome this, but you can. And it is by letting go of the need to forgive. That will come when it comes, if it does. Focus on forgiving yourself. That is giving yourself grace, letting yourself know that you're grateful for the way that your inner child has taken care of you, that if you knew better, you would do better. Now you are learning and you are going to put the practices into action. Things are going to be different from now on. There's no way you could have done it any different. And that is what we call radical acceptance. You've got to accept where you are right now. We cannot change what happened in the past. We can definitely change our future with the actions that we take now. And you just start where you are. And the third mistake that everybody has made who has a narcissistic mother is believing the lie that she needs to understand you in order for you to heal. Believing that she needs to change or understand you in order for you to heal. So we have this sense that something outside of us has to be different in order for us to be okay. So this is codependency that your mother set you up for when she made you focus on her instead of on yourself as a child and going on into adulthood. So you think that in order to be whole, in order to be happy, in order to be fundamentally okay, that you need your mother to understand what she did. You need your mother to validate you. You need her to listen to your explanations, to hear your grievances, to take accountability, to treat you better, all of that stuff. But now that you know a bit about narcissistic mothers, the fact that they can't change, they don't want to grow, they are hiding a shame-based self with this bravado and this grandiosity and this attention seeking and this never taking accountability, never admitting any flaws, never admitting to be wrong. The list goes on and on and on. Now that you know the truth that she doesn't operate like a normal human being, she doesn't have the same motives or desires as a normal human being, you can see that more radical acceptance needed here. She is not going to change. And I always get people looking for the loophole. Without fail, somebody asks me, is it possible for her to change? And I always say, anything's possible, but for the purpose of your healing, you need to act as if she is not going to change. And that's the truth, that 99.9% of the time, she's not going to change. I mean, I might even venture to say 100% of the time. I don't know, but the narcissists that I've seen who have become self-aware and are in treatment to deal with their symptoms, I don't know if they've really changed, that they're managing their symptoms with the knowledge that if they stopped managing their symptoms, they would go right back to where they were. So I don't even know if they've changed, although I give them credit for becoming self-aware and trying to stop hurting people. So accepting that she is not going to change, not looking for loopholes, like your mother might be the rare case of someone who does change. And because even if she did change, the truth is that that has nothing to do with you. The child in you needed to believe that she was powerful enough to impact her mother to change, to believe that she had that kind of mattering to her mother, which was not true. You didn't matter to your mother except as something she could use to get her needs met. And so the acceptance is that whether or not she changes, that has nothing to do with me. It's highly, highly, highly unlikely. For the sake of healing, you want to say she's not going to change. And that's the truth, by the way. And to realize that you don't need anything or anyone outside of you to change in order for you to be happy, in order for you to be whole and find peace, whether that's your mother or anyone else. In addition to that, you don't need any circumstance to change in order for you to be happy. That might surprise you, but it's true. All your happiness, everything you need is inside of you. And that may surprise you. You may not believe it yet, but I'm telling you the truth. You are the only one who can give yourself the happiness you need. That is a fact. And there's a Sinead O'Connor song, and she says that the greatest gift she received was finding out that all she needed was inside of her. So all I need was inside me. And that was the greatest truth. And it is an actual fact. So all this looking outside of yourself to try to feel okay, which, by the way, how is it working? You know, part of the way we can see that is not true is that it hasn't worked for years and years and decades and decades. We want to stop looking outside of ourselves and start looking within. So with your mother, it is the acceptance of her limitations. You know, it's understanding that nothing you say or do will ever get through to her. And that's why it hasn't so far. That is not going to change. This decades and lifetime of trying to get her to understand you is not suddenly one day going to change because you did it right. You know, how many times have you thought, if I word the text just the right way, if I say the words just the right way, if I have the right tone, come on, like it's not working. It's never going to work. You're never going to say it the right way. The words are never going to be right. Like you're coming from a faulty premise. It was never you. It's not you. It's her. And she can't accept accountability for anything. She can't say she's wrong because that would get to that shame-based self. If she admits to making a mistake or to failing someone, especially her daughter, that means that she is all wrong. That narcissistic self believes that it's all good or it's all bad. So if I admit to making a mistake, then I'm all bad and I can't do that. So it's just never going to happen. So you've got to release that, find that acceptance. We do this through mindfulness. So mindful self-compassion is this amazing modality that's been researched and championed by Dr. Kristen Neff. She's done tons of research on it. She's got 3 pillars. And they are being kind to yourself, which is quite obvious. You treat yourself with loving kindness instead of being mean to yourself. And that's going to take some reparenting yourself and some practice as well. And she has lots of practices you can do. And treating yourself at least as well as you would treat a friend is the way she describes it. And then the second pillar is common humanity, which is understanding, just like these mistakes that we all make, all the daughters of narcissistic mothers make these mistakes. There are other people like us. There are other people going through what we're going through. We're not alone. And sometimes a simple Google search can show you that. I remember trying to figure out something called maladaptive daydreaming that I used to do, which was escaping into a fantasy world for hours on end because my reality was too painful. This started when I was a child. And I kind of was getting curious about it because I had started to do my healing and noticing that back in the day when I got out of my marriage and I got sober, I was still doing this stuff, even though I felt like I had done the work, that I shouldn't be resorting to these things anymore. Well, fast forward when I'm starting to understand why I self-sabotage and why I do the things I do, I look up, what is this? I kind of put the symptoms into the browser. And there's tons of people that do this. I thought it was the weirdest thing in the world. There's millions of people do it. They are doing studies on it now. They've got communities of support. Like it's this whole worldwide thing. And I thought I was alone in that. So we got to understand that no matter what, no matter how strange or unique you think that your problem is, I guarantee you there's someone else or millions of people going through it. So that's common humanity, and also reaching out when you need help instead of suffering through alone. And the third one is mindfulness. And this is that radical acceptance of whatever is in the present moment, whether that's your circumstances, your feelings, whatever those are. It entails acceptance of emotions without minimizing them or blowing them out of proportion, because emotional processing is a lot of this work too. We tend to bypass and be afraid of our emotions because, again, our mother taught us that they weren't allowed. And so we thought if we experience our emotions, we're going to lose our mother. Again, you choose the bond with the mother instead of yourself. So with the emotions have got to go. And so now you've got to bring them out. You've got to take care of them. That's part of mindfulness. And the other part could be practices such as meditation. When you meditate, even for just a few minutes each day, you really teach your mind how to be at peace. I've studied the impact of meditation on the mind, and it does improve emotional regulation, with emotional dysregulation being one of the big symptoms of childhood trauma. This is really an amazing outcome of meditation for people like us. So there you have it. Those are the 3 very common mistakes that daughters of narcissistic mothers make. I have made all of them myself. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.